This is Dennis Ramundi and Phil Goldberg. Our guest today, Loch Kelly, studied with Adi Shanti. Very interesting. And I guess, Phil, would you put his brand of teaching and what he covers in his book under the same umbrella that most of mindfulness, meditation, and things of that sort come under?
I don't know. I think he's got a much more expansive view of and repertoire than most of the
Right.
people. Most of the people who do mindfulness just do that. He incorporates mindfulness, what we think of as mindfulness practice, but he also does a lot of other things, and his spiritual background is quite eclectic.
Right. I think he said awareness of awareness is being aware of mindfulness. And again, I think what it all comes back to is that beyond thoughts, beyond feelings, beyond all sensory perceptions is this field of consciousness or awareness. And, you know,
Yes.
different groups describe it in different ways, but it's that, and then once one is operating from there, one is as if witnessing the different activities that go on in the world. And I'm going to ask you about this from Vedic tradition. Uh, that's one stage, and that would be where the self is separate from activity. And I think he would categorize that as non-duality and good feelings and all of that. But in Vedic tradition, in the Hindu tradition, does it go beyond? Doesn't it go beyond there where the if you go from that separateness, that oneness in yourself, and then you see or you perceive or you experience that oneness in those things that you were initially separate from.
Yeah, you're outlining a model we're both familiar with,
Right.
and I think you can find traces of it in a lot of traditions. It's quite fascinating, actually. But and I think Locke would agree that that sense of "I am that," to quote the Upanishads, that I am infinite and I am not bound, or as Walt Whitman put it, I'm not confined between my hat and my boots, and that there's this uh, unchanging eternal awareness uh, that's the bigger identity, the truer identity than our egos, that's often a starting point. And a lot of people you make the mistake of thinking that just awakening to that reality is an end point. And when we were with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back in the day, and other teachers have pointed out the same thing, that could be considered a kind of uh, beginning
Right.
of a new phase of evolution, and that there's more awakening to come when you could realize you're infinite, you're unbounded, but then what about the rest of the world that you feel separate from? There's the ongoing integration of your unboundedness with the unboundedness of everything else.
Mm-hmm. Known as unity. Now, do the Buddhists, in Buddhist teaching, is the, and you would be more familiar with this than me, is the ultimate experience is nirvana, that awakening, or is it something more like you mentioned from the Upanishads? I am that, thou art that. It's all that.
Yeah, yeah. We should get a Buddhist scholar
Yeah.
on.
Fine,
Um,
fine lines of distinction. Yeah.
yeah, because you know, um, even within the Vedic tradition, there'll be people who would argue these things. And I think, depending on which Buddhist you talk to and which tradition they come from or who their teachers were, you might get a different point of view. So I don't want to venture
Right.
anything about, Buddhism, capital B, with that would necessarily apply to anything. And I'm not scholar enough to say it. But some people would say that most Buddhist teachings this awakening to one's own true nature is considered the ultimate. But I suspect that there are Buddhist traditions where that's simply not the case. That it's not the ultimate.
Right.
There's more to come.
Right. It's interesting that Locke was at a program at Columbia University in conjunction with the Union Theological Seminary that I think is actually part of Columbia, or it's right there with it, where psychotherapy was and religion or theology, spiritual practice, or whatever, what was integrated into that program. And as we mentioned off the air to one another before, that probably wasn't available till somewhere in the late 70s or 80s. And I wonder if that's still a program that, if somebody goes to these theological seminaries, maybe associated with Columbia or Berkeley or Harvard, if there's that spiritual element that they integrate into those programs that work in conjunction with psychology departments.
Yeah, I wish such a program existed when I was dropping out of graduate
Yeah,
school.
me too. I
I
originally went
might
to
have.
graduate school in clinical psych, and that's what and one of the reasons I left after I got my master's degree was, I was into TM. I saw that meditation brought something to people that they really needed. But then when I got in meditation, I realized, okay, there was a lot of stuff that the psychotherapists were offering that was good too. But at that time, there was no. This was early '70s. There was no putting the two together. You're either on one boat or the other boat. But I think that's changed. And I
Yeah,
think, like we mentioned before, a lot of psychotherapists recommend meditation, recommend yoga,
yeah.
recommend all of this stuff.
But back in the late '60s, early '70s, these programs didn't exist,
Yeah,
or if they did, it was some offbeat school
yeah,
somewhere
yeah.
that. But the integration of spiritual practice
Hmm.
and higher consciousness with psychology really began earlier than that, but it takes a long time
Right.
before the outliers like Abraham Maslow
Hmm.
and Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass,
Right.
people like that
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's
were
right.
looking.
He was a psychology professor, right?
That's
Wrote
right. He
Timothy
was.
Leary. I remember, Phil, it was like 1971, 72, going to the head of the graduate department in psychology and telling them that I wanted to leave for a while to become a teacher of meditation. And I might as well have said I was going to Mars, And it was like, and this program was very psychoanalytic. And so they really just thought this was a wacko. They were nice to me, but it was like, I'm sure in the meetings afterwards, they said, Dennis has really lost it and he's going off into Never
I
Never
know.
Land. But to
I
me, I
had a
was like,
similar
yeah.
experience. My mentor in sociology, because I was politically active and all that. He compared me to Billy Graham. He said I was like a lost cause. I was leaving the barricades and letting the crazy religious joining the religious nuts.
Right.
It's oh God,
Well,
yeah,
but like again, I think uh, we sacrificed. We took the insults back then, but I think now we paved the way for others. They can go and say the things we said, and people will be nice to them
we are
or understand.
vindicated.
Yeah, we are vindicated. So it was,
Power to the people.
yeah.
We
And actually, there's probably, if you look hard enough, there's probably programs. I think there are. That where meditation, practice of spirituality, non-duality, and all are at the forefront
Yep.
of those programs. Those programs are built around that. So, and I think ultimately, look, this you need both. People need to develop inwardly, yeah, which is what meditation brings, and then people also need practical tools for dealing with life, which is a lot of what psychotherapy does. And I think that hopefully we're at that point, and it'll go from here. I used to take these you took courses when you studied psychology and the theories of personality, and it went from Freud to Jung to Maslow and all. But I don't know if in the last 40 years, I don't know if there are other folks that are considered of the caliber of a Freud or a Jung or a Maslow who have taken it the next step. I really haven't stayed current, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't know. I don't know that maybe, history will single some of them out, but I think, in the early days of this integration of psychology and spirituality, it was the outliers, mostly
right,
in the Bay Area, and the very early rigorous programs that developed are still going.
right.
California Institute of Integral Studies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Sophia, which used to be the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology. Those were the groundbreakers back in 40 years ago.
Right,
But when something works, other people pick it up. So
right.
people learned from them, and they started to integrate spiritual practices, probably on the basis of all the research that was
Right.
done.
Yeah, and those people were brilliant and also bold because you really had to go against the grain. And once you stepped too far in an eastern direction, you were poo-pooed by your department usually, and you were considered an outlier. And again, I recommend people in your book, Phil, American Veda. I mean, you get into that the
Yeah,
influence of Eastern thought, Vedic thought in the West, and things we take for granted now. If I say
yeah.
karma to anybody, they pretty much know what I'm talking about. If I say meditation, they have some idea. If I talk about yoga, they have some sense. They might not completely, have a deep understanding of it, but at least you can use those terms, and people, and you're accepted as as not somebody from another dimension. Whereas, man, in the '70s, early '70s, that was not the case.
Oh God, no. No, we were swimming upstream in those days, but it's a big part of the integration of not just Vedic teachings or yogic teachings or Buddhist teachings in general, but of a kind of universal sense of what spiritual development is that applies to all people across the board. And it's that kind of universality that took these the awareness of this out of the what could be considered religious, which is one of the obstacles that people were facing back in the day. It's something like this would seem, oh, you're bringing Hinduism in, you're bringing Buddhism in. But once these teachings and practices became understood as universal and non-threatening to either religion or secularity, or secularism, I should say, then they could be integrated into curricula at schools.
Mhm. And who knows what the future holds? I think society is becoming more open, and this movement of people that are spiritual, non-religious, will continue. And then I think that spirituality, as we understand it, is creeping into religion more and more. So I don't think
Yeah.
there'll necessarily even be a separation there. Well, very very good guest, Loch Kelly, the bright fellow, and look forward to speaking with him again.
Okay. Me too.
All the best.
See you
All
next
right,
time.
next time.